whose most primary duty is to protect the fundamental and human rights of the citizens, I consider it a certificate of independence.
Having seen such extraordinarily painful scenario, I do not wish to go into the merits of right or wrong.
Has adopted a very studied policy of not allowing the appointment of inconvenient and independent judges.
Judicial independence in India isn't something that happened overnight. It's been a long, dramatic journey, shaped not just by the judges, but also by the prime ministers. From Indira Gandhi to Narendra Modi, each PM has tried in its own way to influence how judges are appointed, sometimes openly, sometimes subtly. And every time, the Supreme Court responded by either changing the rules or defending its ground. The evolution happened through 4 major cases called the Judges Cases. And the best way to understand them is through a simple lens I call the 4 C's: control, collegium, constitutional morality, and continuity. In this session, we'll walk through each case, not as dry legal texts, but also the real stories in the backdrop of prime ministers operating then. When Indira Gandhi wanted loyal judges, to the time when Narasimha Rao quietly let the judiciary take back its power, to when Vajpayee ensured internal checks, and when Modi's NJAC was stuck down despite Parliament's full support. By the end, you'll not only understand how judicial appointments evolved, but you will also be able to answer why they evolved that way and what it means for the democracy today. Now, before we dive into the actual cases, let's get one simple framework clear: the 4 C's. Whenever we talk about judicial independence, there are 4 things we need to check, almost like 4 filters, to make sense of what's really going on. First is the control. Who had the real power in judicial appointments? Was it government making the calls, or was it judiciary standing firm? Second, collegium. Now, this is India's unique system where judges choose judges. Where did it come from? How has it changed? And why did it create so much of debate? And third is the constitutional morality. This means not just following the law in letter, but upholding its spirit. And fourth is the continuity. Did each case build on the previous one? Because legal consistency matters, especially when the stakes are so high. As we go on through each judge's cases, we'll keep coming back to these 4 C's. They'll help us understand what happened and why it mattered. So why do we discuss these judges' cases? Because not only they are foundational to how Indian democracy works, but also they keep showing up across the UPSC syllabus. In Polity, these cases explain the real meaning of separation of powers, the basic structure, doctrine, and the judicial independence. In GS2, you can see questions on collegium, judicial reforms, NJAC. They are all linked to this debate. And even in your essay in ethics, you will be asked to reflect on things like transparency versus independence, or institutional checks and balances. And obviously in the interview, when panelists ask your opinion, should the executive have a role in appointing judges? So these are straight out of these cases. Right now, even the debates like All India Judicial Services, which is being debated, the NJAC is being talked about. So if you understand this story well, you don't just score marks, but you learn how power and principle fight it outside and inside the Constitution. So let's begin with where it all started. In 1981, the first judge's case. Indira Gandhi was back in power after the emergency. And after emergency, she didn't want judges who would challenge her. So she wanted something as a committed judiciary. Now remember the Constitution 124 that said that judges have to be appointed after the consultation with the Chief Justice? So what does this word mean? Is the CJI's opinion binding? So in this case, SR SP Gupta versus Union of India, the Supreme Court said, no, consultation doesn't mean concurrence. The executive has the final say. That meant the government could transfer or appoint judges even if the CJI disagreed. And that's exactly happened. Justice S.H. Sheth, who was known for ruling against the Gujarat government, was suddenly transferred to Andhra Pradesh. No explanation, no consent, just moved. This judgment gave executive full control over the judicial appointments. There was no collegium yet, and judicial independence was weakened. So coming back to our 4 C's, who had the control? The executive. Collegium, which didn't exist, and constitutional morality took a serious hit. And continuity, it was the first step in the battle that would last decades. So this case showed that judiciary, what it was up against and how to fight it back. Now come to 1993, the turning point, the second Judges case. And that was the moment when judiciary finally said, enough is enough. P.V. Narasimha Rao was the Prime Minister, a silent one, strategic, too busy with the economic reforms. He wasn't interfering like Indira Gandhi, but the damage from her time still lingered. One moment from history which kept haunting the judiciary, Justice H.R. Khanna's supersession in 1977. He was the lone voice defending fundamental rights during the emergency, and he was punished for it. That pain stayed. And that time the court was asked again, does consultation mean final say for the CJI? And the court reversed its earlier stand. It said yes, the Chief Justice opinion backed by the senior judges is binding. And with that, the Collegium system was born. A body of CJI plus 2 senior most judges would now decide on the judicial appointments and transfers and not the government. Now, this wasn't written anywhere in the constitution, but the court carved it out as a part of protecting its judicial independence. Coming back to the 4 C's, who had the control? It moved from the executive to the judiciary. The Collegium came into the existence. The constitutional morality was strongly asserted, and in continuity it reversed the 1981 case. So this case redefined the balance of power, and from here on, judges would no longer wait for the permission to decide their own successors. Now, of course, we again move to a time of 1998. It was Atal Bihari Vajpayee, a prime minister known for his respect towards the institutions. By now, the Collegium system had been in place for 5 years. There was a new concern. The concern was that the system was too secretive and sometimes too concentrated in the hands of CJI alone. For example, in 1991, CJI M.H. Kania made certain appointments without fully consulting his senior colleagues. This raised eyebrows even inside the judiciary, and the moment set off a rethink. So the President of India made a formal reference to the Supreme Court under Article 143, asking how exactly should judicial appointments happen and how should the consultation be interpreted. And that's what we call as a third judge case. And the Supreme Court answered clearly. It said that Supreme Court appointments, the Collegium must include CJI plus 4 senior most judges, and for High Court, CJI plus 2 judges. Plus, if 2 judges of a Collegium disagree, the name will be dropped. So the court wasn't just defending its judicial primacy, it was also adding internal safeguards to make sure that power didn't rest in just one chair. Coming back to the 4 C's, who had the control? Still with the judiciary. Collegium was expanded but made more accountable, and the constitutional morality definitely deepened with checks and balances. And logically, it built on the continuity of the 1993 judgment. So this wasn't just self-preservation, it was self-correction. The judiciary said, yes, we control the process, but we will regulate ourselves too. A rare example of institutional maturity. But now we come to one of the most debated episode in the Indian constitutional history, the NJAC story under PM Narendra Modi. By 2014, Modi had come to power with a clear majority, the first in decades. One of his promises was institutional reform. and he didn't want to leave the judiciary untouched. His main argument: the Collegium system was too opaque. No written records, no public criteria, no accountability. And honestly, that criticism wasn't new. Even former judges had questioned the way Collegium worked. So Modi's government brought in the 99th constitutional amendment, creating a new system called the NJAC, National Judicial Appointments Commission. So that had CJI plus 2 senior most SC judges, the law minister, 2 eminent persons nominated by a committee. It does sound inclusive, right? But there is a catch. The catch is that NJAC kind of gave a veto power to any 2 members. That meant the law minister plus 1 eminent who could block any judge from being appointed, and that eminent member could be a member coming from politics. This raised serious alarms in the judiciary. What if a strong, independent-minded judge was blocked silently by the government? That's where the political story turns into a legal war. It was 2015. The Supreme Court heard multiple petitions challenging the NJAC, and what became to be known as the 4th judge case, the court delivered a 4-1 majority verdict and said NJAC was unconstitutional. It violated the basic structure of the constitution because judicial independence, according to the court, cannot be compromised even in the name of transparency. The court said the participation of the executive in judicial appointments through NJAC destroys the core of judicial independence. And hence, the Collegium survived, but not without the criticism. Even one of its judges, Justice Chamleshwar, he dissented by saying that Collegium was too opaque to defend. So where is our 4C lens now? Who has the control? Judiciary retained it, defeating an executive-led reform. Collegium was preserved, but still it's being criticized. And constitutional morality, in that court, choose independence over the procedural reform. And of course, the continuity was reaffirmed 1993 and 1998. Collegium resisted the disruption. So this case was less about law and more about trust. Modi government said, let's fix the system. The judiciary said, not if it lets executive interference. And so the NJAC passed unanimously by the parliament was still stuck down. A classic example of separation of power and a reminder that even popular reforms can fall if they violate the constitution's core. So let's pause and connect the dots. We have seen 4 different prime ministers shaped and sometimes shook the process of appointing judges. Indira Gandhi tried to control the judiciary and the court gave in. Narasimha Rao didn't interfere and the court took its independence back. Vajpayee respected the balance and the court fine-tuned the system. Modi tried to reform it, but the court pushed back to preserve its autonomy. And remember the 4Cs framework? That's your answer writing tool. Who had the control? What happened to the Collegium? Did it uphold constitutional morality? Was there continuity with past rulings? So these are the questions you need to think. Use these 4Cs and you won't just recall the facts, you will think like a constitutional analyst. So where do we end? Judicial independence in India hasn't come through one judgment or one prime minister. It's been built over 40 plus years, case by case, conflict by conflict. Every time the executive tried to tighten its grip, the judiciary either gave in or fought back harder next time. And though this tug of war, we have seen a system evolve, imperfect, yes, but deeply rooted in constitutional values. So now whenever you read or write about judicial independence, you know exactly where to look at the 4Cs, at the judges' cases, and the prime ministers who shaped them. And that's how your polity classes at Civilsdaily would be like.